This video is brought to you by FanDuel. Sign up today and battle your friends in daily fantasy challenges to win real money. Sign up using promo code WatchMojo.
Welcome to Deconstructed, episode number 4 for Sports Edition. I'm your host, Ashkan Karbasushan, editor-in-chief of WatchMojo. Let's meet the panel. Dave Woodley and Julian McKenzie, thank you guys for being here. So this list, we did it in 2013. At the time, we had 100,000 subscribers. Today, a video will get about 100 to 200,000 views on its first day. Back then, they got about 10,000 views on the first day. Nonetheless, today it's at over 800,000 views, and with the recent Ronda Rousey upset, I thought it would be time to deconstruct this one. Guys, let's get to it. Number 10, Appalachian State Mountaineers defeat the Michigan Wolverines back on September 1st, 2007. So I want to start off with one of the comments from Foxboy72006. He goes, App State got lucky. My question to you gentlemen is, if there's a fluke, does that make it even more or less of an upset?
I don't think it makes it. I think it's still an upset at the end of the day. An upset is a team that was undervalued by either Vegas or the fans that came in and beat a better team or overcame the odds. Whether they went on a fluke or a missed call or a lucky play is regardless. But anyways, with Appalachian State, that it wasn't a fluke. They outplayed Michigan the entire game. They led them almost the entire game. They gave up the lead late. Everyone counted them for dead. Everyone said, oh, Michigan's got it at this point. Appalachian State came down and scored a touchdown with like 2 minutes left before essentially blocking Michigan on a field goal try.
Julian?
A win is a win, man. I totally agree with you, Dave. And what's funny about it, if that play didn't happen, we probably would have thought, all right, we would have looked back at a few sequence of plays, but because of that block, everyone's going to go back to that block, and that's going to stand out as one of the most defining moments in college football history. So whatever, it's a fluke, maybe not, but a win is a win. So that's going to stand out as one of the best upsets I've ever seen.
Number 9, next up, Villanova Wildcats defeat the Georgetown Hoyas April 1st, 1985. Bob Gibson, another viewer, says, quote, I think the Villanova win over Georgetown in the 1985 NCAA basketball final was the ¡1 upset of all time.
I disagree, man. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of other upsets in professional sports that would rank up on it. I don't think, actually, you know what? I would rank Appalachian State over Villanova over Georgetown. That's just my personal preference.
Yeah, no, I definitely would too. I'm not even sure this is the biggest upset in NCAA basketball history. Now, if you look at March Madness as a whole, there's upsets every single year. So an 8 beating a 1 seed, yeah, it was in the championship, it's great, but it seems like every 2 or 3 years an 8 seed beats a 1 seed. I would almost say Lee beating Duke when Duke was a 2 seed and Lee was a 15 seed is just as big, if not bigger. And to go back to the Appalachian State example, Appalachian State was a Division II team at the time, taking down a top 5 Michigan team.
Both of you are basically saying you'd swap 10 and 9 if you had to.
Yeah, I'd be willing to swap both of them. I'm not sure if I would be willing to put Villanova and Appalachian State a little higher up on the list, but I guess more because maybe more because I align a little more with college football, I'd want to put Appalachian State a little above Villanova, not to take anything away from that upset though.
Number 8, we're going to switch gears and move to Olympics. So September 9th, 1972, USSR, the former Russian communist state, defeats the USA in basketball. Ed Vega, one of our viewers, says, quote, the 1972 Olympic basketball final was not even an upset. It was highway robbery, end quote. Gentlemen.
Isn't that loss so bad that the American players in that game, they still haven't accepted their medals? I think they reunited in 2012, just to come together, and they actually discussed the idea of saying, you know what, maybe we should accept those silver medals. And then they unanimously shot that down. So it's pretty bad.
Yeah, it was a questionable call or calls at the end, no doubt. But the U.S. only have themselves to blame in this one. They came in heavy favorites. They let a inferior USSR team stay in the game. And then even after the whole timeout fiasco, they let them throw a full court pass into an easy layup with like 1 second left. I mean, yes, it was a bad call, but on the other hand, what's getting lost in this whole thing is it was actually an amazing play by USSR at the end of the game.
Point well taken, that's great, especially coming from an American, that's nice and dandy. But let's say in general you have a loss, let's say you're just trying to guess the outcome of a match, and then you end up being wrong because the refs make a call. Does that make the sting worse, or does it kind of save grace and you don't feel as bad for guessing wrong?
Yeah, it's easier to blame the ref. Again, it's someone that nobody likes the refs anyways. You don't really know who they are. They're mostly nameless and faceless as far as things are considered, it's a lot easier to blame them, place the blame on them, than it is on your favorite quarterback for throwing the interception, or your team as a whole for like letting a worst team stick around for the full game and then choking at the end.
That's not to excuse the refs at all. They're supposed to get it right every single time. I know they're nameless faces on the sidelines, but they have every opportunity. They have every opportunity to look at an angle and get it right.
I know their names very well. I curse them very loudly. Trust me, they know who they are.
But it does suck a lot though when they do it, especially even more so in like a fantasy game when you lose to your buddy.
My life is enough of a fantasy, so I'm not that active in fantasy sports, but we do actually have the WatchMojo office pool for the NHL, and I mean, I won't lie, we set it up once. At the beginning, I pick my players, and then we kind of forget, so they changed the rules, so we're not even allowed to make trades anymore. Just that's the team, and that's what we keep throughout the year. I've never won it yet, so. Since
you're not a big fan of the season-long fantasy, you should definitely check out the daily fantasy tournament we set up for Mojoholics with our sponsor FanDuel.
Okay, so I won't lie, I obviously heard of FanDuel, but I must have been living in a cave. How does it work?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. You deposit a few bucks into it, and then you can enter any contest you want. You can either play someone heads up, or in this case, you can go to fanduel.com/watchmojo and join, a couple hundred other Mojoholics and compete against them. You pick your lineup. It's not a traditional draft. You have $50,000 salary. You pick, a quarterback, a couple running backs, wide receivers, and all that, and then you accumulate points. And if you have the most points by the end of Sunday night, you win some cash.
So you're more like a GM.
Yeah, you're more like a GM, and it's not so much, again, like you don't have to be trading with other people. You don't have to worry about like what this guy's picking, what this guy's picking. You pick whatever players you want on your team.
All right, good stuff. Number 7, we totally switch gears and look at the Euro. Back in 2004, Greece defeats Portugal. And I'm going to read you Jake Johnson's email. Why the f*** do you mean that Greece is one of the only underdogs people didn't want to pull for? F*** you people, nobody gives the Greeks a fair shake at anything, and you always downplay us without any explanation. That's right, f*** you. Watch Mojo for hopping on the anti-Greek football bandwagon.
I understand why he feels the way he does, but this definitely deserves to be on this list as one of the bigger upsets. I mean, they beat a young Cristiano Ronaldo, who's the best player in the world right now, arguably.
And Luis Figo was the actual talisman still at that era, so it was Figo, one of his last tournaments, one of the greatest players of his generation, and a young Ronaldo on Portuguese soil. The Euro was being played in Portugal, so this was a huge upset.
This is also the first time in an international tournament where the finalists actually played each other in a group stage, and Portugal won that first game. I believe 2-1 was the score. So Greece ending up winning that game in the final. I mean, you get your revenge, retribution. That's an amazing story for them.
So you're saying you'd keep it on the list?
Yes, of course.
Number 6, back to the Olympics. Rulon Gardner defeats Alexander Karelin, September 27, 2000. Wiz Farmer, one of our viewers said,
Great name, by the way.
Great, I'm sure it's on his birth certificate.
Wiz Farmer.
When Gardner beat Karelin, everyone was mad, even Americans. Greatest wrestler of all time, loses his final match, etc., etc. Still bad blood about that. Do you keep this on the list? Is this an upset? Do we care? Should we care?
It should be a huge upset. I admit I'm not a big wrestling guy, but looking at the backstory of Karelin, this is a guy who hadn't lost a match in 13 years. This was a guy leading up to the match, hadn't lost a point in I think about 6 years. So this was literally a David versus Goliath moment. So absolutely it should be on the list, whether or not you care about Greco-Roman wrestling in the Olympics.
I don't know about that. I think Greco-Roman wrestling is way too niche. I think if you asked me to name 50 upsets off the top of my head, this one wouldn't even come close, and this one also existed in my lifetime as well. Once we start going down this rabbit hole, what's next? Is there like a curling upset? Is there
don't offend, don't insult curling on a Canadian.
Is there a lawn darts upset? I mean, it's too niche.
Well, the Olympics, right? I mean, for a good few days, we start caring about all of these normal sports that we wouldn't normally care about.
We pretend to care.
Well, no. Some people actually don't pretend. That being said, I mean, yes, people cared about wrestling in that little bit, and maybe a few people were really into it, especially with that U.S. wrestler who was there. So a lot of people may resonate with that a little bit more as opposed to say, they were just doing some random match, outside of the Olympics. So the Olympics plays a huge part in having it on the list. So I totally think it should be there.
Number 5, Major League Baseball makes its appearance. The New York Mets of 1969 defeat the Baltimore Orioles. Matt Petrulli says, I don't think he understood what we meant by upsets. He goes, number 5 was complete BS. That wasn't upsetting at all as a hardcore Mets fan. So we're not saying it was upsetting, but the question is, was this an upset? Should it be on the list? What do you guys think?
Wasn't this like this Mets franchise, they were a young expansion franchise. They weren't necessarily all that great going in. And then they have a remarkable year in the 1969 going to win the World Series. They had Tom Seaver on that rotation. I think he had a record of 25-7. Nolan Ryan was actually on that team, but he was just a young reliever. This was years before he ran up on Robin Ventura and beat him up on the mound. So I think it belongs there.
I know you meant this, but they weren't an expansion team in '69, but they were the first expansion team to win. I think that's my view of this, which is, I think even though the Mets were out 15, 20 games out of first place, and Baltimore was the favorite, I think any team that was out of expansion going to eventually win the World Series was going to kind of be a surprise. But yeah, whether or not you call this an upset in defeating the Orioles, I don't know, Dave, you have any thoughts on it?
The upset itself was actually the Mets being a good team in '69. They were terrible the years prior. They were the laughingstock of baseball. And even in '69, I think they were like 20 games out at some point, climbed back in and made the playoffs. Like, that's the true upset there. It wasn't so much the upset over the Orioles. I don't think at that point people were just like, oh my God, like, how did this happen? They didn't come out of nowhere. They played well enough to get to the World Series. At that point, it's a little bit hard, especially in baseball, to truly upset somebody.
So you guys are saying, if I understood well, that you would not put it on?
I mean, it's such a good story where you feel like it should be on just regardless. But the World Series itself didn't seem like a huge upset. It was a huge moment for New York. It was a huge moment for sports. And it was an awesome end to an awesome story. But the actual series itself, I don't think was a huge upset, especially when comparing it to other ones on the list.
I'll say this much. As someone who prefers the Yankees over the Mets, I agree with the commenter. This is upsetting.
So I will put it this way. You guys sometimes see that we show a possible entry in our introduction or in the outro when we say, who would you put on the list? To me, the way we do things now, this would be what we call an intro or outro. It wouldn't even probably make it into the HMs, because in the honorable mentions, because there's a few other entries that I'm looking back at this list, older, wiser, better looking, that I'm surprised didn't make the cut. So I would say, if I had to do this list again, this would be just an intro, outro. Number 4, the introduction of the NFL. January 12th, 1969, the New York Jets defeat the Baltimore Colts.
It's going to stand out as arguably the greatest Super Bowl win ever. Joe Namath, Broadway Joe, guarantees the victory over the Baltimore Colts, who have Johnny Unitas. They have this great team. There's no way the Jets can win this game, right? As a Jets fan, even though I was not alive for that, whenever we are feeling sad and lonely and down, we can always remember this victory with pride. This victory deserves to be on this list. I will fight for this, literally.
I think it's by far the biggest upset in NFL history. I know it's not the most recent, and the NFL is nowhere near the juggernaut it is today, but there's a couple things people got to remember. The Jets were a 20-point underdog going into that game, and this is during an era, too, where there wasn't as much scoring, so 20 points might as well have been like 30 points. A 30-point underdog winning a Super Bowl today, the match would not even exist. I think it's maybe overall in the history of sports number 1, definitely number 1 in NFL upsets.
Number 3. This is the one that I would put number 1 personally, so you guys could tell me why I'm wrong. Buster Douglas defeats Mike Tyson, February 11th, 1990. I'm actually going to start off with Mr. Royal Fatness. Honestly, I don't see any American sport upset ranking higher than Buster Douglas thoroughly outboxing and knocking out Mike Tyson. Mr. Royal Fatness and yours truly are on the same side here. Do you guys disagree with us?
Yeah, I think the argument can definitely be made that it's the number 1 upset of all time. A few other factors that go into it. Obviously, Tyson was a huge favorite. Buster Douglas was a journeyman. He was there to get his ass kicked, more or less, for some people that were going to watch a pay-per-view or whatnot. And even the boxing historians, like Jim Lampley, I believe, during the broadcast itself, said this is the biggest upset in the history of heavyweight championship boxing. Buster knocked him out. Like, nobody thought that was possible. Huge upset. And then to make matters, I guess, worse, to make it even look like a bigger upset, it wasn't like Buster went on to some illustrious career after this. He fought one more time, lost, and then essentially retired. He did a few more journeyman fights later on, but he essentially was like a nobody. It wasn't like, oh, this was the launch of his career. It was the only part of his career.
So on that note, yeah, I'm personally, when I saw this list again, I revisited it the morning after Holly Holm knocked out Ronda Rousey. And I was like, oh, maybe we should redux this list. And I was thinking of a few, but I was like, it's already in there, and a few of them surprised me. I was kind of floored to see this only at 3. I kind of understood 2 and 1. We'll get to that in a second. But so to get back to my point with Holly Holm and Ronda Rousey, some people were like, oh, would that make the list? If we were to do the list today, whether it's an individual or team, would the Holly Holm, Ronda Rousey bout get to this list?
It should be in this list. I mean, Ronda Rousey, she was at a point where, just like Mike Tyson was beating people up in the first few rounds, first few seconds, Ronda Rousey at one point had the fastest knockout in UFC history, I believe at 14 seconds. She was literally, at one point, not even just the most dominant female athlete, but arguably the most dominant athlete, male, female, whoever. So for Holly Holm to come out of nowhere, get out of that first round, first of all, that was amazing. And then actually knock her down, I mean, a lot of people were floored by that. Of course Ronda Rousey and the Holly Holm match should be there. What I'm curious to know is if they ever get to having that rematch, how is history going to play out?
Yeah, I would say if there is a rematch, and let's say if Holly Holm defends her title and then goes on being dominant for X period, and I agree with your bigger point, Dave, then I would say no, because people are going to say, well, Holm, like, who was Rousey? Who cares type of thing. We'll forget her. She was the flavor du jour back in 2013, 14, 15, whatever. But if I think Rousey were to beat Holm, and then she would retain her champion or regain the championship and stay on top for another 4 or 5 years, and UFC continues to grow and whatnot, then I could see it being in the the bottom half of an individual upsets. Number 2, something a little bit more current. The New York Giants defeat the New England Patriots on February 3rd, 2008. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on this one? Should it make the list? Too high, too low?
I still think the Jets' victory should be over this. That being said, as someone who was around and got to see the dominant New England Patriots, of course this deserves to be on that list. Everyone's going to remember it for the great helmet catch by David Tyree. I still can't believe he got that. It looked as if he had like a piece of gum on his helmet. But the play before, no one talks about this, but the play before, Eli Manning almost got picked off by Asante Samuel. If he holds on to that interception, Patriots win that game. They're undefeated, and that team we could be talking about them on another list, top 10 teams of all time.
Yeah, I think it deserves to be in the top 5. I think the Jets one, to your point, was bigger, and I would put Tyson versus Douglas ahead of this as well. But it's just such a satisfying victory for the USA, because Boston is just, Boston's the most polarizing sports town there possibly can be in general.
Look, I think even as a Pats fan, you have to respect the Giants. The Giants are one of the few teams that have had the Pats number. Coach Coughlin has had Belichick's number, and frankly, Eli Manning even more clutch than Peyton, and who thought that was possible? I kind of agree with you guys. I think this is one that should make the list. This could, frankly though, this could be a number 10. I think the fact that it was still very fresh in everyone's eyes when we did the list, we kind of said, okay, it'll be up there. But I agree. I think in hindsight, the Jets one would be on top of this.
It's a very polarizing team, too.
It is but I would even put still the Buster Douglas over this one.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right, number 1, the United States beats USSR, the Miracle on Ice, February 22nd, 1980. Deserve it, number 1?
Yeah, I think it deserves to be number 1. Everyone seems to identify with it. A lot of people remember where they were when they were watching it, or that Lake Placid. Everyone remembers that Olympics. There are actually a lot of good NHL players on that U.S. team. Guys like Neil Broten, Jim Craig. It was a pretty good team, actually. I mean, like I said, I wasn't alive for that. I wasn't alive for a lot of these entries on this list. That being said, the Russian team, they were a total army. They had arguably the best goaltender in the world in Vladimir Tretiak. The fact that they were able to stand up to them and beat them was amazing. And people think that this was a gold medal game. It was not, in fact. It was the game before, and the U.S. went on to win that game against Finland.
Do you believe in miracles is going to be the most remembered part about the entire game? You could go and poll 100 people and ask them who scored the game-winning goal. 5 may get it right, but if you ask them what was the famous quote at the end, it'd be Al Michaels, do you believe in miracles? Just spawned a pretty solid movie with Kurt Russell. And again, it was just such a major upset, it was one of those upsets that also it was bigger than sports.
Who scored the winner? Was it Mike Ruzioni or?
I have no idea,
that could be trivia. You get a MojoBox if you get the first one to get the answer right. So I guess we all agree number 1 deserves to be number 1. Finally, we're going to look at lightning round, where we're going to say, is there one entry that didn't make the list that should have? Why? And what would you remove? Let's start with you, Dave.
I put on the 2007 Fiesta Bowl, Boise State versus Oklahoma. They were only 7.5-point underdog, but there's a lot more going into it. Boise State, from small conference, years gone by, oh yeah, they win all their games, they can't beat anybody, This is their one shot. Playing Oklahoma, the most iconic college football program of all time, Fiesta Bowl. Not only did Boise State outplay them and beat them, it was a great game. Trick plays, I mean, how many times do you see the Statue of Liberty even happen in a big game and then actually work to win, a bowl game like that? Top it off, star running back proposes at the end, very iconic. I mean, great game, great upset, should be on the list. I would take off the Rulon Gardner one.
Okay.
Yeah. My upset that I'm going to take, I'm actually going to take the Patriots' first Super Bowl victory, actually. They had knocked off the St. Louis Rams. They were regarded as the greatest show on turf. They had Kurt Warner, Bruce Torrey Holt, they had Marshall Faulk on the team. A lot of great pieces who won a Super Bowl the year earlier against the Tennessee Titans. Tom Brady, no one knew who this guy was. This dude was a Montreal Expos draft pick. Fun fact. He comes into the game leading the Patriots. They hang in there. He drives the team up the field. Adam Vinatieri hits the game-winning field goal. It sets off a dynasty, if you will, for the New England Patriots. It's the beginning of that lore. That's the game you look at that begins, the notoriety around the New England Patriots. So I would throw that upset in the list, and I too would take out the Carellin one.
So oftentimes we're accused of having a pro-American bias, which is ironic since we're actually based in Canada, but nonetheless. But we sometimes overcome and we kind of downplay that, and we maybe subconsciously go out of our ways not to show a pro-Canadian bias. But if we had to do this list again, I would actually pick the Montreal Canadiens' 1971 victory over the Boston Bruins. Why? Bruins were at the top of the game, Bobby Orr, many other greats. Canadians were basically riding Ken Dryden in his first year, who won the Conn Smythe Trophy before winning the Calder Trophy the ensuing year. I would pick that, and then the one I would remove with some hindsight would probably be the Mets-Orioles matchup. Well, it's official. This list has been deconstructed. Should we redux it? Should we not? On behalf of Julian, McKenzie, and David Woodley, I've been your host, Ash.
This video is brought to you by FanDuel. Sign up today and battle your friends in daily fantasy challenges to win real money. Sign up using promo code WatchMojo.